good day. Sorry, nobody says that. Hello. This is the end of a really busy week. I think if anyone in the property industry at the moment isn't having a busy week, then that would be very much an exception. This has been a really busy week for new cases. We always thought that July, August, September are going to be really busy. And then, well, who knows what happens after that. But we make hay while the sun shines. And as I say, our new cases this week have really been firing through the doors, which has been fabulous. So that brings me to talk about one thing very briefly, and that is expectation management. And this is an observation, not a criticism. The one thing I wanted to talk about in particular, over the last week, I just asked the question, how many times do you think we have been asked as solicitors whether we have received property certificates yet? That number. And how many times have we also been asked as solicitors whether the property certificates that we have received are actually correct and in order and enable us to proceed without any further queries being raised? And therein lies the problem. If you are requesting an update on a case and you're an estate agent, then you need to make sure you actually ask the right question. Otherwise, you won't be able to actually give the right answer to your client when they're asking for an update. If we look at property certificates, just very briefly, property certificates here, there's one from, used to be the DOE property certificate, we called it, it's now called the Regional Property Certificate. And essentially it deals with roads, water, planning and sewage. And then we have the Council Property Certificate, which, it's funny, I actually used to say it just basically dealt with building control issues and not an awful lot else. There is an important thing that it should be dealing with, which I'll come to. But the reason why the question, have you received property certificates, isn't enough is that it seems to reflect a misconception that conveyancing is a tick box exercise, and simply receiving a property certificate does not necessarily mean that everything must be fine. It isn't the case that a property certificate is issued if something is good. A property certificate is issued if someone applies for one. The matters which have come up over the last, even a snapshot of this year, which isn't exactly indicative of the number of cases that we would normally have, if I can just think briefly about the issues that have arisen from having received property certificates this year so far. We have had the property certificate disclosing the following. One in particular, the actual roadworks to the entrance to the development, which were supposed to be complete before the development was occupied, had never been completed. And in fact, the development was not just completed, but was fully occupied by all of the homeowners. So that was a breach of planning that was ongoing. That was disclosed in the property certificate. We've seen roads which are not only not adopted, but there's no road bond in place in the property certificate. Same thing with sewers, no Article 161 agreement, and the sewers were not adopted either. We've obviously, one of the things that comes up frequently in a property certificate is whether there is a public sewer traversing the site, in which case then we have to usually get a map from NI Water. That's come up frequently. The other biggie in terms of sort of sewers and things like that is if the property is in the countryside and it's not serviced by the main sewers, then if there's a septic tank, we always want to look to see that there's a consent to discharge effluent on the property certificate, which is depending on how the ownership of the property has been over the last number of years, sometimes hasn't been the case if the ownership of the property has been in one family for many years. Regional Property Certificate also deals with planning, and we can sometimes see any planning permission issues. Neighbour notifications are important there as well, if there's going to be something in the area which may affect the purchaser's enjoyment of the property and may even actually have influenced the vendor's decision to sell. So those sorts of things that come up. The other thing which comes up not that frequently, but it still is important, tree preservation orders, anything in relation to trees. We've had ones in the past where we've discovered a tree preservation order is sort of mentioned on the property certificate, and the site is totally devoid of trees, which led the vendor to some difficult situations to try to get that sorted out with the appropriate department. Council property certificate normally deals with building control issues. So again, simply having the certificate doesn't actually mean it's correct. We actually have to look at it. One thing I think over more recent years we've found, there is a section in the council property certificate about building licensing matters, in section 3 talks about dangerous and ruinous structures, environmental health and other matters. Environmental health is an important one there, because the environmental health department of the local councils now deal with so much more of the private landlord and tenant stuff, which didn't used to be within their purview. And I think, and maybe the councils would admit this themselves, some of the legislation which is actually mentioned here, that doesn't cover all of potential landlord and tenant issues. So it would be important, if we're buying a buy-to-let property, that we look very carefully at the council property certificate, but that might not show all of the potential enforcement actions that have been taken in respect of this property or against the vendor landlord. So as I say, that's really important. Expectation management, to be able to give clients an appropriate update on the case. Simply being able to tell them that property certificates have been received is not sufficient. The killer question to ask the solicitor, if you feel minded to do so, is whether the property certificates have been received and whether they appear to be in order. That is the question which will give you the most accurate update. So as I say, I hope that isn't intended to be a criticism. It is just a reflection that obviously at the moment everyone wants to complete everything, even the ones that we've been instructed on this week. They want to complete before the July holidays. And in that circumstance, it's really important that if estate agents are asking for updates, that the updates that they're giving their clients are actually accurate and they're based on asking the right question. So I hope that is of some use. I can't wait to update this in a couple of weeks, where hopefully this number here, about how many property certificates, how many times we've received property certificates, will be equaled by this number here, the number of questions we're asked as to whether the property certificates are in order. So that is basically it. It has been a freakishly busy week. We are delighted to have we've made use of the flexi furlough scheme to bring someone back part-time. It's a much slower process, this bringing people back, that we would possibly have hoped for, but nevertheless we're very grateful that that scheme is in place and we will continue to use it. Just one thing very quickly to all you business owners out there, I have to say that the last 3.5 or so months in lockdown have been without doubt the most stressful of our entire career. I mean, we started our firm in the middle of the last property recession, but this is just something entirely different. We just simply didn't know what was happening from one day to the other. We didn't know when we were reopening. We were working 12 hours a day at home, just trying to keep everything, all the plates juggling. And we don't know what the next 3 months are going to be like. We certainly don't know what the next 6 months or 9 months are going to be like. So if you're a business owner watching this, you have my admiration, my sympathy, my support, and my gratitude as well, because the more we engage with each other on LinkedIn and other social media, the more we can support each other. So thank you, have a wonderful weekend, and more next week.